Right now, you're listening to the Azeem Digital Asks podcast, the podcast where I, Azeem, talk to some of the top marketers in the industry, find out everything about them, how they got to where they are today, and more importantly, sharing some really useful marketing tips that will help everybody listening to this become better marketers. Stay tuned for another great episode. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Azeem Digital Asks podcast. I am really excited for this episode because we're talking about developer relationships and managing them and speaking a developer's language. And I've got a brilliant guest with me today, Billie Geena, and I'm going to absolutely steal her Twitter bio and then let her give you a better introduction. So she says that she is a full-time SEO wizard, part-time blogger, ambitious queen, and young, scrappy, and hungry. Billie, welcome to the show.
Hiya, how you doing?
Yeah, very good, very good. Full of hay fever, so apologies to the listeners, but I won't be talking much. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great, thank you very much.
Good stuff. Really excited to do this episode with you. As you know, before we get into the meat and bones of the episode, I like to do a bit of a random icebreaker. And for yourself, this is one question I've not asked anybody yet. What was the last concert or the last live event that you attended, and what was so good about it?
Okay, the last live event that I attended was the West End show, but travelling, and I'm never sure what that's called. Was it like touring? Of Everybody's Talking About Jamie when they came to Sheffield. And it's one of my favourite musicals. I saw it when they was kind of still in the small Crucible Theatre, just about to kind of launch it. So it was nice to see it years later when it's actually a thing. And it's just my favourite musical. So I just had the best time.
Nice. My knowledge of musicals is extremely limited outside of Blood Brothers and Hamilton, so I can't really add any value there. But yeah, look, let's get into the sort of meat of the episode, and it's talking about managing developer relationships, something that I know that you've had to do in the past. So I'm really excited to learn a lot from you here on this. So I wanted to start by asking you, what would you say in your opinion then is the best way to manage that relationship with developers?
So I don't think there's any one set best way to manage a relationship with a developer. I think the best thing you can do is to take time to get to know the developer and how they like to communicate. So then you can adapt your way of communication to work for them. So I know many developers prefer not emails but written communication, so over like various tools, spreadsheets, um, logging it as tickets. They much prefer that and responding like that than arranging a meeting or a call or sending them a big lengthy email.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So it's interesting that you say there's no sort of one size fits all solution when you are talking to developers. For yourself, I'm quite keen to learn in the past what sort of difficulties you've had when you've been communicating with developers and how did you overcome them?
So I've had quite a few different levels of issues and difficulties with developers. I've worked both in-house and agency for SEO. So when I was working in-house, theoretically, it should be much easier to push through a ticket for anything development-wise. However, you've got to realize that in-house developers also have to manage the expectations of all the other stakeholders as well as all the other tickets they get. So for me, one of the things that really works then, and I've actually done this since leaving the in-house role to be an agency, I will just say, can I join one of your sprints? And then I can worm my way in to get what I want doing and know whether they are actually taking my ticket seriously or where I actually fall in their spectrum of things that need doing. So I wouldn't try to invite myself to every sprint they do because they do them. So I know some companies that do them twice daily, and I don't have time to do
Wow.
that.
I can imagine. So that's really interesting, and it's fascinating for me that you've got both that sort of agency and in-house experience, that sort of broad range of working with developers. I imagine during your time that you've probably come across some difficult devs. So if there are people listening to this who are currently in the process of trying to communicate or trying to work with difficult developers, what advice would you have for them?
The first thing I always try to do in one of those situations, and is I'll just ask, what's the best way for me to be able to communicate with you? And normally that helps because then I know the way I'm targeting them is correct. I've sent that many of times and been completely ignored. And when that happens, that's when I start trying to figure out their phone number or a way to contact them so I can be like, look, it's important we work together. What's the best way to communicate with you? Things like that. Also, there's a tool that I've recently been told about and have used a couple of times. I'm a bit obsessed with it. I think it's called Fibonacci. And basically, you can list your issues you want to raise with the developer, and you rate out of like between 1 and 10 or something like that on your level of importance, and then it's sent to them and they rate it with their level of importance, and then it'll work out an average and send it through to them so they know, so that they kind of get to see it on the level as, okay, yeah, there is actual value in this, and I've said that there is, so I can't completely ignore it. And that's been quite a good way to communicate with them, but they don't have to communicate with me if they don't want to. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing that. One thing that I just thought of listening to you speaking there. So we touched on difficult developers. One that I've not asked you yet about is stubborn developers. So have you ever come across that sort of impasse where you're working with a really stubborn dev who is just not going to play ball? How did you approach that, and how did you get a resolution to that situation?
Okay, this one's going to be really controversial, kind of. It's something that is an ongoing thing for me at the moment with a developer. But basically, they have no interest in speaking to me. They're a third party developer as well. So our clients hired us both kind of third party and just gone, okay, you guys talk. And I have tried everything. And they have just decided to take a complete disliking to me. To the stage of they've emailed the client advising that they send me on some SEO courses. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it's a mess. I think I'm very close to being able to speak to them, and I think once we've had a call, things will get better. But basically, it's been about 2.5 months of me emailing them for updates and just trying to figure out what's happening, and then not responding or um, sending the client messages, which the client then has to forward on to me. So I'm currently going through the approach of basically saying, well, I've said to them, with you going through the developer, with you going through the client and me going through the client, we're both getting diluted responses, and they're feeding one thing back to me which doesn't sound correct, and it's probably vice versa to you as well, because the client is not technically minded, they don't know about what you're doing or what I'm doing. So we need to sit down and talk, basically. I sent that earlier on today, so when this comes out, I'll let you know if I've heard anything back.
Yeah, good luck with that. Your answer has led me very nicely to my next question, which is simply, how do you speak a dev's language?
From my experience, I just don't try to speak the developer's language. I don't try to use all the correct terms and things because it almost looks stuffed with what I'm saying, like almost like keyword stuffing back in the day with SEO. It's like I'm just dropping all this jargon and I'm not using it correctly because I'm not a developer. I don't know like the ins and outs of what they do. I understand it enough to make suggestions on it, but what I'm saying might not make sense to them because we have different understandings of things. And it's even like in development and say PR, the term boilerplate exists in both, but it has two different meanings. So it's like I wouldn't try to use their language. And since just explaining things how I'd understand it if I was explaining it to anyone, but not dumbing it down or anything like that, I've been getting a lot better responses from developers. So yeah, know your buzzwords, but don't try to force it upon them, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's sage advice because in my experience in the past, seeing people who, we'll call it what it is, try and bullshit, will always get spotted and get called out. Brilliant. Thanks very much for sharing that. I wanted to move on then, talking about improving those lines of communication. So if there are people listening to this who are in similar situations or who could benefit from having those communication line improved, what advice would you give for people?
So my advice actually would be to communicate issues through a spreadsheet. I found that so helpful, and I've been doing that for maybe 8 months now, and I get majority of my things pushed through, other than with that one client that I mentioned earlier. Um, but yeah, like break down the issue. So like if you're sending things over to them, send them the things that are the highest priority first, or send them everything but color code it like traffic light system. Break it down into which area of the website it affects, break down specifically what the issue is, what the implications are. Send them even further reading on it. So if you know they respond well to a certain like development influencer type person online, see if they've got a resource on that, and send that to them, um, and just give them as much information as possible, as well as like prove what you're saying is an actual issue. So find examples of that, but at the same time, don't spend your whole day trying to find 100 examples of one issue, because it's likely that the developer would be able to run a quick script on like Python or anything and be able to pull the data you're trying to find. Find them like 5, 10, 20 examples of an issue, and then just say, look, it's here, it exists, it's likely at a larger scale. Can we look into this?
Yeah, that's brilliant. And then that's just made me think of another question here. So I imagine the skills that you've got in communicating with developers has been built up over a while. So if there are people listening to this who are quite junior and new into their roles and are just about to sort of embark on that journey working with developers, what advice would you give for first timers in, starting off on the right foot and trying to avoid some of the common pitfalls?
Definitely break it down like I've just said, but find a way that also suits you as a new SEO. So I know a lot of SEOs that are relatively new that are really into content rather than me, who's into technical, and if it's not in a spreadsheet, it doesn't work with my brain anymore. So they'll try to communicate through sending them big lengthy emails, and there's nothing wrong with doing that way. I just watched your tone of voice, like that's so important. It's so easy to send something that sounds professional but actually it sounds rude. So something that I advise any new starter at the SEO Works where I work is, I say any email to a client, to a developer, anyone that doesn't work here, sit and read it out loud to yourself before you send it. Like, don't worry about feeling silly, because when you're reading it out loud and leaving the spaces where the commas and the full stops are, you can hear how it's going to be read. And you'll need to edit yourself and probably write an email like 2 or 3 times. And again, don't be afraid to like insert yourself into that developer's life, and don't be scared to harass them, because that's how I get a lot of things done. I will call, I will email, I will try to join calls that I'm not invited to. Like, I'm going to harass you until you acknowledge me.
I might take that as the snippet for this episode.
That's fine. I will be the bane of your existence. Any developer that works with me, but it works, and I do have really good relationships with majority of the developers I work with, and I think that's because I don't oversimplify issues because I know they know more than me, but I just remind them of the implications that if this isn't right, that's what's going to happen. But yeah, for anyone new to SEO, I guess the most important thing is to, one, not be scared of developers, because I know a few people that are, and I don't get it myself, but and two, and they're just people, like they're just here to do a job, and they want to do the best by the website as well. And although you have different priorities, there's probably overlap.
That's brilliant. You've made me think of one more thing here, and then I promise we'll come to the last couple of questions, and then I'll let you enjoy the rest of your day. But let's talk priorities. You've got something that you need to engage with a developer on that to you is super high priority. Developer says, this is going to slot into things I need to do today at number 7, or I can't get it done until next week. When you come to that impasse, how do you find that happy middle ground where there's a resolution for both sides?
I'll be honest, a lot of the time you're not going to get that resolution. Like, as brutal as that sounds, like 80% of the time when that happens, I don't get what I want, and I've learned to accept that, because you've got to remember that a developer doesn't just look at making sure the website looks nice or ranks well or anything like that. They also need to worry about security and making sure, like, it's just not broken, and they're not leaking details and things like that. But just say, okay, yeah, that I understand that this might not be high priority at the moment. Can I ask kind of what other high priority tasks there are, because you might need SEO input. And that's a sneaky way of being saying, oh, they could say something like, oh, we're fixing the size of the button. You're like, how high priority is that though, really? Like, be cheeky. Like, there's no harm in asking anything, and like, no one's going to be mad for you just trying to get a bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing. Sadly, we are coming towards the end of this podcast now, but I've really enjoyed listening to what I call absolute knowledge bombs on this episode. If there are people listen to this, or let me rephrase that question, if there were a handful of things that you wanted people to take away as the key points from this episode with you, what would they be?
Don't be afraid of developers is the big one. Don't be afraid to be pushy. Like, be confident in your suggestions. If you know it's going to make a drastic change, don't let it get pushed to the bottom. Just like make that really clear that the issue is there. Um, like, don't overwhelm yourself with the suggestions you want to take with developers. I know it's so easy, especially if you're new to, say, technical SEO. You'll find a lot of issues to start with sites, and they'll sound like the end of the world. But ask somebody who knows better. Like, ask someone in the company you work for, or just another person. No one's going to be mad for you asking questions about things like that. And don't try to learn everything a developer does, because it's helpful, but we don't need it. Yeah, and just be confident in yourself, and that'll take you miles.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Really appreciated that. If people wanted to find out more about you, connect with you on social media, follow you, how would they do that?
So I'm basically on literally every social media platform, under the name Billie Geena. That's Billie with an IE, and Geena, Geena. I realise neither are spelt the conventional way. And if you do want to find me on LinkedIn, where I never check it, but I do occasionally, that's my actual name, which is Billie Hyde. And again, both names are spelt wrong, so that's Billie with an IE and Hyde, HYDE. Yeah, that's where I majority of the time.
Awesome. I'm with you on LinkedIn. I do not like it at all, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Billie, from me to you, this has been brilliant. Thank you for being a fantastic guest. As always, this is the part of the episode where I shut up, frankly, and say nothing and let you have the final word on your episode. So within reason, the virtual floor is yours. Final word goes to you.
SEO is fun. Enjoy it. Like, don't get bogged down. Don't try and learn everything at once. And listen to this podcast.
So that was another great episode in the bag. I'm really enjoying hearing from some brilliant people in this industry. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow me on Spotify. Please leave a rating on Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you are using. Tell a friend to tell a friend, and hopefully see you for the next episode.